thanks for the introduction. I started my presentation with this slide. Building a data vault sometimes feels like this picture. You go uphill on a quite steep path. You have to carry some load. There is an abyss to the left and to the right. There are a few steps you can follow, and some fellow travelers who can help you if it's needed from time to time. Yeah, and the most important is that the view from the top is spectacular. So following this analogy, the three things I wish I knew before starting with Datavault. I'm Gabor Gollnhofer. I'm working in this area for almost 25 years, and I have several years with Datavault. I don't want to read out this slides, so let me start with my journey, how I started my journey with Datavault. I suppose most of you know that the first article about Datavault was published in a newsletter called TDAN back in 2002. And I read it then, and I thought that, oh, this guy must be crazy. I mean, it will never work, or it might work in theory, but never in real life. So I just skipped the whole idea. And then several years later, we were designing a supply chain data warehouse and had some problems with history handling. And somehow this old article came up, and I reread it and found some interesting concepts in it. So it was in 2009, and then we decided to look at it. And then I went for a training to the Netherlands, and then showed how it really works and what are the key points and how we can move on with using Datavault. And then we created our own Datavault automation tool. And since then, wherever we can, we are using Datavault. Still, there are things I wish I knew before starting with Datavault, and then here are the things. The first I wish I knew is that everything looks nice and bright before we met with the real data. Plus, we also have the end users and the developers to deal with. I think that I should have known this, as it is true for all data projects, not even if it's Datavault or not Datavault. But we have the end users and the developers we have to deal with. So we have to convince them about Datavault. We have to show them the benefits of it, and we have to train them how it should be used and not abused. And this all takes time. But if we don't do this, then they won't use the system, and at the end it will be a failure. So this is the first thing I wish I knew, that it's in some sense it's different from other data projects, but in some other sense it's very similar. The second, let me tell you about an old, let's say, project which is well known from a long time ago. The project is called Augean tables. I suppose you know the hero Heracles or Hercule, depending on if you're a Greek or a Latin speller. His fifth labor was to clean the stable of Augeas that wasn't cleared for several years. So the project was a fixed scope project with a clean goal. Plus, he agreed with a fixed price on the project, which was the 1/10 of the cattle, and it has to be done within a quite short fixed time period of 1 day. And for a hero like him, we can say it was quite a humiliating task. And by the way, it was impossible to do. So he found a solution, which was to divert 2 rivers, kind of an automation, and clean the stables with its water. And by using this solution, he completed the task in 1 day. So it was time for a celebration. Not really, because the customer refused to pay and the task was not accepted. So at the end, our poor hero had an unsuccessful project in his hands, plus a pile of dung. And yeah, as just a side note for the story, it's not the end of the story. If you're interested, you can read it up. It's quite a story. But on the analogy of this, or using this as an analogy regarding automation and regarding Datavault, the second thing I wish I knew before starting and before creating our own automation project was like this: garbage in, garbage out. Then the third one is, I think that Datavault is not a silver bullet. It's more like a real vault, so that you can store your precious things in there and get them out in a controlled way, which is great. But we still have to do some things to reach to this point. We have to do requirement analysis, data profiling, impact analysis. We have to design the architecture, even if we can use templates. We have to do data modeling. We have to design or ETL processes, do the data mapping, design our reporting or BI or analytics layers. We have to create our reports or dashboards. We have to build the system, and even if we have quite good data automation tools like dbt Vault or like Verscape, there are still things which we have to do. And last but not least, we have to deal with a lot of management related stuff like project management, data quality or data quality management, master data management, change management, just like in any other projects. So to sum it up, I think that using Datavault methodology helps a lot, but we have to keep our expectations reasonable. And building a data analytics system is still a task to do, or a job, which is good, because I think that this is what we like to do.
Hi guys, so thanks again for joining this. We will share also our 3 tips regarding the things we wish we knew before we started our Datavault project. And without further ado, let me introduce myself. If we could go to the next slide. My name is Anna. I'm based in Amsterdam, but I'm actually currently in Portugal, where I was born, and I'm eating a lot of pastel de nata now, a lot of pastries. In case you don't know them, just try them. They're very good. My background is computer engineering, where I studied here in Lisbon in the Technical University, and started about 8 years ago or so as a business intelligence consultant and analytics consultant, and worked in different industries such as telecommunications, banking, government, and so on, mostly on the Portuguese market, but also international. And about 4.5 years ago, I moved to the Netherlands, where I joined Picnic and Iliana, of course, as a data engineer, and later became the product owner of data engineering. And now to you, Iliana.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Now that we have settled all the technicalities of starting the presentation, just a few words about myself before we dive into the content. So just like Anna, I live in the Netherlands. I'm Bulgarian Canadian. I did my Bachelor of Science in Computer Science in Canada, and then I did something between programming and business in business information technologies here in the Netherlands in Twente University. My first job 10 years ago was as a business intelligence consultant, landed on it by complete chance, but I loved it. And I have been doing this ever since in different areas. At the beginning, I started in banking, then logistics, and in the last 7 years in e-commerce. And that's how I got to Picnic 6 years ago. When we just started operation, we were, I think, 10, 20 people. And now we are, I think, 6,000, the whole operation in Netherlands and also in Germany. So we grew quite a lot. Back then, I was the first data engineer. And as the first data engineer, you basically do everything but what your job role is supposed to be. But in that role, I started everything around master data management and business intelligence, and then Anna joined the team. So now we are a team of 9 people, and I'm the tech lead, and together with Anna, we are essentially running the data warehouse as a product in Picnic. So for those of you that don't know what Picnic is, just very quickly an introduction. We are an online supermarket, as I mentioned, in Netherlands and in Germany. We deliver for free at the lowest price. How we can achieve this? It's by a very lean supply chain and a really optimized operation. So essentially, we get our products from the suppliers, we efficiently store them in the warehouse. From there, with the electric vehicles, we deliver them to the customer in the so-called bus model. And by now, I think we have the biggest fleet of electric vehicles in Europe, about 1,000. And it just quite a big operation to run technically the whole supply chain. And we don't have physical stores. We only have an app. And it looks a bit like that. So essentially, all the products you can find in the supply in the supermarket, we have them, and we strive to make your shopping journey 3 minutes. So quite challenging, but we are really motivated to make it easy for the customers, and we do this with a lot of data as well to help us in our tech stack. So as you can imagine, because it's a supply chain end-to-end operation, which we need to run in a quite a lean way, we have a lot of source systems. So it's something like 120 data sources, mostly microservices. I think by now they're even 130 because it just keeps growing every week. And we operate this with 9 data engineers, with spreading across the whole supply chain. So everything related to app data, supplier data, managing the warehouses, making the deliveries, all the feedback from the customers. And you can imagine all those sources are with different quality, different kind of information that they give us, and we combine all this with Datavault and also with Kimball in the presentation layer, and we provide it to more than 200 people in the supply chain. So now to dive into the Datavault, just to get a feeling of what we have built in the last 5 years. So with those 120 sources, we have a bit more than 900 Datavault tables and more than 9,000 Datavault columns. For this presentation, I dived into the stats because I love numbers to see a bit how our Datavault look like right now. And you can see, and I think it's very nice, and I wonder if other companies have this, the high number of links that our Datavault setup has. And this is, if we reason about it, is because of the big supply chain. And if you think even of a single order, we have something like 30 different hubs participating in different links there. So this is quite, I think, special for our business. And then another interesting thing that I found is our bridge tables. I did not realize they're so big in numbers in columns compared to all the other tables, but then it also kind of makes sense because of this big links that we have with different entities and collecting a lot of information around that. So just something out of curiosity to know what we've built, and now some stories to share, lessons that we learned the hard way. And together with Anna, we were brainstorming what can we share, and I was like, 3 is how can we fit our learnings in 3 points? So we kind of split it in 3 topics with 3 subtopics. So we kind of cheat a little bit here, but we really want to share it. So the first one also, like Gabor mentioned, automation is quite important. And indeed, if you have the data quality, you can realize a lot of value. But for us, automation was like we've always been focused on data quality, but we had a lot of struggle at the beginning with kind of manual operations. And right now we run about 1,000 jobs per day, and each one of them is easy to develop and maintain. And the data engineers are actually enjoying this work compared to, I don't know, 5 years ago, when we would do a lot of copy paste and you just kind of dread the moment you have to maintain this kind of duplication. So what we see is important for automation is a zero boilerplate. In essence, we design our framework in a way that there is no code duplication for new implementation. The only thing that needs to be set up for a new pipeline is the extraction code, which is always custom, the transformation, if any, usually like super hard business logic, like removing some dashes from IDs, and that's it. And then the configuration to which target tables this data should go. And everything else should be done by the framework in our thinking. And then besides this, we also focus a lot on DevOps tools, because at this kind of scale of jobs that are running, we need to be able to quickly debug them. So what it means for us is to have the moment a job fails, to quickly diagnose what is going on. By that, we have raw source data in the database. So like one query away, we can find out if something doesn't fit the requirements. Then we have a lot of logging from the job itself to a table in Snowflake. So everything is logged and we can monitor the runtimes in our meta dashboards, as we call them. And we also have kind of scalar logging, which is logging on the container to monitor all the resources that are used. So it's quite verbose in that level. At the same time, very important to be able to control the memory on the different Datavault jobs, because some, like there is the peak to average is usually quite big. There is one job that will always require a lot more resources. And if you scale everything to that level, you end up overpaying for resources, especially for something that you run thousands of times a day. And then to the third kind of subgroup in automation is for us maybe obvious now, but at the time not so much when we started, to focus on parallelization and customization. So parallelism was not the first thing we thought about when we implemented Datavault. We had everything sequenced, everything was very fast. We had, I don't know, 500 customers. Life was good, but the moment we started scaling up, we had a lot of trouble fitting our sequential kind of jobs into any normal time frame. So then we had to really think about atomicity of transaction and how we can take advantage of this parallelism. So we put a lot of transactions there, and now we can just run the same process at the same time, and we don't worry about it because it's idempotent and it takes care by itself. So for us, customization was important. We built actually in-house automation. 5 years ago, there was not so much in the market. I think now there are a lot more tools to do that. But one of the customization that was quite interesting, and I'll give you one specific example, is we have a lot of events where we have an account, like the company playing different roles, like a producer, supplier, logistics provider, administrator to paying the invoices. So this traditionally you have to put it in different hubs, right? Those are different entities, but actually they come from the same master source, which is one account. And now in our framework, we have this kind of role-playing hubs where we on the input pretend that they're producer and supplier, but on the loading, we just load it in account. So this is one example. And let's give it to Anna for the next one.
All right. Second tip we bring to you is the fact that also very much in line with the first presentation from Gabor. So I was really surprised to see that Datavault takes time indeed for you to realize the value. its implementation. So it's like good red wine, or in my case, where I am, good port wine. It just takes time for it to taste really good. And when it comes to Picnic, it took about a year or so. So we also had to convince our business users and our backend that this was the right solution. But you can only realize this value after you collect a lot of multiple sources, and you make sure that everything is historized, and you collect enough data. So after you've built a really good library of all the entities from your business, you can really realize its full potential. And its full potential is across many different areas, and I would like to highlight these three. So the first one is data science. Indeed, the data scientists are very pleased that they have all the fields they could possibly imagine already tracked, and with a really long history. And it is very important for machine learning models, where you want to really like travel back in time and see what was the state in a given point in time. So Datavault is really good for that. Another thing is systems migration. So even though we have about 5-6 years of operations, we already have a legacy, right? And we started as a monolith architecture in our backend, and now we have everything in microservices. And Datavault is perfect for this kind of architecture, where you can have simply each microservice feeding a specific selection of satellites. And also the third area is recovering history, where Datavault really shined, being the hero of like recovering the state whenever even the backend couldn't. So in really big operational incidents, the data engineers were the firefighters and were able to surgically get the state of a given entity in a point in time. And that is really, really cool to see. Also, another thing that is important to realize is that the business model is ever changing, of course, and you shouldn't think too much about it. So if you stay close to the book of Datavault, so if you do everything by the book, you keep the logic really lean. So without trying to predict too much how the business model is going to change. So try to keep the business logic as much in the top layer, so either the business vault or the Kimball presentation and so on, and avoid locking yourself into really complex structures, such as, like in our case, as Iliana said, we have links with a lot of that can have potentially a lot of entities connected, and we try to have more like a modular architecture, where we prefer to have more links with less hubs connected, because this allows us to more easily add more relationships or deprecate relationships without ending up with a lot of fields in the links that are legacy and are holding us back, because we like a clean model. So these are the three things. Then onto the third big thing, which is to always piggyback on functional requirements and try to collect the profit later. So what do we mean by this is we all have projects from the business, right? They always want to have more analysis and more things tracked, and always take the opportunity to track more than you should in Datavault. So when you will look at the presentation layer, in our case, we use the Kimball modeling technique. A data engineer is usually very greedy, right? So we try to only expose the things that the business needs and try to not lock ourselves into complex structures like slow changing dimensions and things, or incremental loads and these kinds of things that take a bit more effort to maintain and to change if the business model changes. But when it comes to Datavault, because it's so easy to add new fields, thanks to the automation, it comes virtually for free. Always try to add as much as you can from the beginning, even if it's out of scope. If the field is available, just track it, because in the end, it will pay off. And it will pay off for reporting in general, where if the business comes to you and asks you for a new analysis or a new like aggregated data source, you probably are already tracking things, so it reduces the time to market for new kinds of analysis. Also, the data scientists will respect you a lot, because they don't need to constantly bother you for tracking more things. They're already there, and plus they're already tracked for a long time in history, and this is like pure gold for machine learning models, as I mentioned before, and also for emergencies, as I mentioned before, because there's, and also security in general. We had a lot of cases where we had some potential security breaches, and we were able to travel back in time and really see, you know, the auditability, what was the endpoint that triggered that change in state and so on. So all this kind of like auditability and recoverability features are really welcome when it comes to Datavault. So all in all, make it a point of pride to collect as much as data for little effort, because it will definitely pay off. So these are the 3 big tips we have for you today. We hope that you can apply them in your future projects and you learn something with us. Iliana and I will be around for any questions you might have. And that's all. Thank you.
Right. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Mike Magalsky, calling in from Boise, Idaho in the United States, and happy to see a lot of familiar names on the call. And shout out to all those over in Europe that we haven't seen in a long time, just honored to be able to share with you guys a little bit about our experiences here at InfoVia. We're a Datavault builder implementation services provider, and we've built a few of these in clients around the healthcare and education, insurance, manufacturing, and services spaces. So fairly broad view of the world, but we're going to talk today specifically about the lessons that we've learned across those. And I'd just like to call out, like Gabor said, you know, the view from the top of the mountains is spectacular, and we really believe that this data journey is an adventure, just like the Idaho outdoors, where a couple pictures here where we participate in the outdoors for adventure. And I think every day that we play with data, we find new things and go new places and are able to see that view that he represented there. So let's see if I can get my slides to move forward. All right, so as was mentioned earlier, we did build a fairly large data warehouse in the Micron space. My previous employer was Micron Technology, which is a $20 billion Fortune 150 company here in the US. And they produce about a third of the world's memory, which is literally billions of chips every year. And we collected data about the testing of those chips. So if you can imagine test data on the bits that you're producing, that can add up to literally trillions of data points. We were doing 20 to 50 billion a day that we were collecting on those during the manufacturing process. So while it was a large data warehouse, I don't know that it's the biggest data vault. I think maybe it's just the biggest one we can talk about, because there may be larger ones inside of secure organizations that are out there. Some of those folks on maybe on the call today. Also, I'd just like to shout out to some of our friends here in the Treasure Valley, the Boise Treasure Valley, that are watching today, possibly from Micron, but also United Heritage, Insurance, ClickFunnels, West Data, Schools, Blue Cross. So thanks for joining, everyone. The opportunity at Micron, back to the Micron case study, was when you're producing $20 billion worth of goods in a year, and you have a 1% opportunity, that translates to $200 million. So literally on every business day, you have $1 million worth of opportunity that is ticking away. So as was mentioned here, getting business value out of your data is critical, because with that business value, you can achieve some of that opportunity that's on the table. So we have to go fast. We have to provide real business value insight. But as was our case, we had the competition, and in this case, governments, threatening to steal our technology. So the Chinese government spun up an industry to compete with Micron and others in this space. And they literally came out and said that they would steal our technology from us if we wouldn't sell it to them. This is a quote from Jeff Sessions, the US Attorney General at the time, just validating that China really has a brazen scheme to steal the US technology. And so what our challenge was to build this data warehouse that was not only delivering value internal to our organization and to some of our partners, numbering in the lines of 50,000 users globally, but also to give access only where it was appropriate, right? And we had to secure it from folks like this man in the picture here. This is Stephen Chen. I've actually met this man, and he was eventually convicted for criminal activity and stealing Micron secrets. So even inside of our organization, where he was a general manager of a plant in Taiwan, we had to secure the data from the actual theft within our own walls. So the way we did that is by making sure that any given person only could see the data that was appropriate for them within the organization. So just to drive that point home, business value really is the key here. And delivering that value quickly with high quality is the objective. We felt that to do that efficiently, we needed to kind of go back to the drawing board and really figure out how to leverage our strengths that we had from high volume manufacturing to build a model and a set of ingestion pipelines and a user-facing model that was easy to use for the users and fast to develop and could be iterative in its development. And so we discovered Datavault, and about the same time we discovered Warescape as an automation tool. And with those two, we could iterate through our model development efforts quickly and deliver that value. We also are going to talk here briefly about managing our business rules and then what we did about security at a little bit lower detail. I'll finish up by just what I call success insurance in a data warehouse project and some of the unanticipated benefits that we received through this process. So I like to refer to this iterative approach as good enough modeling. Do we ever build a data model that's perfect? I think they're continually evolving, and that's where Datavault's strengths really come to the table. But what we really need to do is deliver that value to the users in terms that they can understand. So the users aren't going to use our Datavault model directly, typically. They're going to go, they want to build dashboards and reports and analytics and machine learning models and ultimately AI around that. So we have to be able to deliver that to them so that they can see it, provide us feedback, and then we continue to improve our model. So I'd like to submit to you that if you are to build a model that's maybe only 60% right out of the box, but each time that you iteratively build that model or improve it, you can correct 60% of the errors, then on the second iteration, you're at 84%, and on the third, you're already at 94% correct. And a model that's 94% correct is, I would argue, pretty useful for the business. If you start at 80%, you can get to 99% in 3 iterations if you're correcting 80% of your errors. So you might ask, well, if I'm iterating and only building a 60% correct model, isn't there a lot of effort being put into reconstruction and rebuilding of this thing? And so this is where, so the answer is there could be, but if you use automation tools, then it limits or essentially eliminates the amount of that rebuilding that's necessary. And there's a lot of confusion around the term automation. When I say automation, I'm specifically referring to using metadata to drive templatized generation of code, ETL code, data warehouse models, data warehouse objects themselves, the loading of those objects, and then the automation of the regular scheduling and maintenance of those objects. So that progression all starts with metadata. And so the premise here is that as you iterate, if your metadata is wrong, if you only get it 60% right the first time, but you can correct 60% each time you generate a new version and load it and iterate, then the metadata is just being adjusted. You're generating new objects, and the refactoring is minimal. The amount of human error is minimized because you're generating code as opposed to building it manually. And so not only will your speed increase, but so will your quality. So let's talk a little bit about the data warehouse reference architecture that is Datavault. And I think everyone will recognize this is a pretty typical progression through the layers of the data warehouse. And so where it starts to get complex in building out your Datavault is in the business rules, right? Building your raw vault has, there's an art and a science to that, and there's you know, an element of the business facing business terminology that you build in your raw vault. But really, when your business rules start to come into play, that's where you're adding the most value to your data warehouse. If the raw data was good enough, then people would just go to the raw sources. But really, it's that integration between sources and then the business value that you're adding in the business vault and information marks that are valuable. So the business rules here span between the business vault and the information mart. And there's a lot of confusion here that we see as people try to figure out and mature where to build their business rules. So we have a couple rules of thumb that we like to follow. The first is shift left for reuse. If you have a business rule that's reused throughout your organization in many different marts, you probably want to shift that left. And that would mean implementing that in the business vault, right? As opposed to a very specific business rule that might be specific to your finance department or your HR department. If they have a specific InfoMart and they want a rule implemented there, you might want to consider moving that rule into the InfoMart because it's not as reusable, it's very specialized. And so we call those the shift right rules, or those that are specialized. Now, there's still an art to this process, and you might ask, well, what are some examples? Well, one example might be just your naming conventions themselves. We really like to keep the raw column names in the satellites in the raw vault because it helps for auditability. But in the business vault, where they're going to be consumed, that's the perfect place to start to transition them into your naming conventions that you want for your data dictionary and your downstream objects. If you do that naming conversion in your business vault, then all of your InfoMarts downstream benefit from that, and you have consistent naming in your marts and your reports, and cubes and dashboards and other visualizations. So another example of a business rule that really transitions us into this security idea is that we think that who gets to see what data is also a business rule. The fact that we need to filter the data even at the cell level is a concept that we introduced at Micron and have implemented at some of our other partners that helps an organization to minimize the number of marts and visualizations and dashboards that you need to build. So if you think about it this way, if I have to build a different report for my CEO, and then one for the directors, and then another one for the individual contributors, and another one for our partners, but they're all generally reporting on the same data, well, now I have 4 or 5 or 6 or 20 or 60 copies of the same data that are being produced, and the only difference between those is slight differences in the filtering, which rows I produce, and in the creation of the obfuscation or masking that take place on the columns. So what we like to do is take those business rules about who can see which data, and we like to put those in the business vault where it's reusable to everything downstream. So if you have a business rule that says someone with this role can see these rows of data, and these columns they can see clear text, but these other columns that might be PII related or health information or more security, those columns need to be obfuscated or summarized, right? If we put those rules in the business vault, then everybody downstream that accesses that data will see what's appropriate for them with very little extra effort to manage that security. It also makes it consistent downstream. So here's an example. This might be claims data. So this is something that most people understand when you file a claim against a healthcare visit, then it would end up in a claims mart or a claims warehouse, and then that claims mart might produce data that is a varying degree of claims services from maybe 2 different providers, or sorry, 2 different payers from several different providers, and on behalf of several different patients, right? Well, it might only be appropriate for a given user to see the data from one payer, or perhaps from one patient. So we want to filter those number of rows, and we call that a metadata policy that we put as a business rule in the business vault. And we've termed this methodology that we use InfoSecure, and it's a product and service that we provide at InfoVia. So a little plug there. But what it does is it helps you to manage these policies and then filter your data based on who is looking. So you might have someone from Kaiser logging in to see this, and they only see the rows automatically. They only see the rows that are appropriate for them. Likewise, if they don't need to see the patient information, if they don't have a need to know who the patient is, then you might be able to obfuscate that. You could also obfuscate the dollar amounts if that was appropriate, right? So any of the columns that are necessarily secure, you can manage with some obfuscation rules or masking rules, to use another term. So in summary, we believe that delivering our data fast with high quality and security are the critical elements of a data warehouse implementation. We covered that we use automation and iteration to build a good enough model and then iterate to make it better as we mature. We manage our business rules with pushing left for reuse and pushing right for specialization. I didn't mention it earlier, but we also like to virtualize our warehouses first, or any of our downstream objects, so any of our marts. If we virtualize those first and then only persist those where necessary for, usually for performance reasons, or sometimes to enact complex translations. Finally, we implement cell level security using our InfoSecure offering. And then a third, I guess a fourth plug, if I'm allowed to add 4 lessons learned, it would be buy success insurance. And we believe that mistakes in a data vault are very costly in terms of time and dollars or euros or whatever your currency might be. And so you can avoid those costly mistakes by employing expert advice. Some of the unanticipated benefits we might get are higher quality through error elimination, generated documentation to make your warehouse more supportable, but also more understandable and accurate for our end users. And finally, this is one that we've implemented with a couple of clients, is that as they move to the cloud from an on-premise data warehouse, since we used an automation tool, we can quickly, it almost is a trivial activity to convert to another platform. Basically, you just invoke the new templates, you use your same metadata, generate your new objects, load them either through a conversion activity or a reload, and you've now migrated to your new platform. So it helps from an architecture perspective not to paint yourself into a corner on your database platform or to move to a cloud. We were able to move one of our clients to the cloud with an extremely large data warehouse in a matter of weeks, literally weeks, from contract signing to completion of that project. So with that,
okay,
I'd just like to say thank
thanks,
you,
Mike.
and hope I hit all the high points and stayed within time constraints. Love to hear.
I'm the CTO of VaultSpeed, so we are a data warehouse automation tool based on the Datavault 2.0 standard, of course, which one otherwise. So my experience is going back from the 90s, where I started implementing data warehouse systems. It was called information systems or decision support system at that time. And so I came across my first implementation with Datavault in 2008. And that's when we actually started our journey of building an automation tool. And at the end now we have with VaultSpeed, we have actually a SaaS tool, which allows you to build actually integration systems based on Datavault. Some of more interesting information there around the race biking and stuff like that on my bio. I want to make it simple and short. So I have a number of, I think, key things that you need to remember when you are building a Datavault system. One thing I want to say to Iliana, if you're looking for a tool that does that hub grouping, I mean, you can be with us. We have that functionality inside the tool because we came across it a lot when there are different names from different sources with maybe different kind of concepts, but you still want to bring them in a single hub. We have this hub grouping functionality just as an information. But very important, okay, very important is that, yeah, build it with an automation tool. I mean, I think even customers that talked here that build something, they always build their own automation tool. We have statistics of I think we have now around 20 customers on our platform. We have statistics around it, and you typically have like 3.5 to 5.5 more objects than in the source system. So it's normal that you need to automate. I mean, otherwise you lose all the advantages of the flexibility of the model because you just develop longer. You have to make all this ETL to do it. It's built for it. You have these low-level components that allow you to do this repeatable patterns, generation of the repeatable pattern logic. So why shouldn't you automate? So that's one of the important things, lessons we learned in our first projects, which was for an, I remember it was actually a home care company. And it was in the beginning when we started with our consulting company, and we did a fixed price project, and we said we're going to do Datavault. And we had to switch in the middle between manual development and automation. And as you can imagine, that project was not so financially very, very good. So that's why it was one of the things I wish I knew at forehand that we needed to automate. The second one is do not build a source data vault. You can say, yeah, well, I mean, everybody knows that, but I'm afraid that still when I sometimes go and do reviews of existing systems, it's still there. People just push push actually the source data into a data vault model, and that's it. There's no integration yet inside your raw data vault system. So not based on like a business conceptual model where you say this is going to be the basis for my business elements. My hubs need to be these business elements, and together with my links, they are my canvas of my model. If you don't do that, well, you have the problem that you will need to build it in somewhere in the next layers, and the next layers means typically manual work because you are not automating anymore. So you're going to have to build in your business vault all the links, the same as links, to link all these customer hubs, for example, of these different sources together, because you built actually separate hubs for the same business element in these different systems. So it's a very costly situation if you do that. Again, we made in the beginning with this first customer, to be honest, we made that mistake also, but it's obvious. And if you know, in 2008, the book the Datavault 2.0 wasn't out. So all these rules about how to do it weren't that fixed like they are now. So really stick to the right way of implementing the raw data vault, because it is going to help you a lot in gaining a lot of time in the total development of your integration system. So that's one of the big rules actually there. And also you gain because of the fact that you mainly don't have to build all these link tables. And then the last one I want to give you as a rule, which is also a very important one, but one we have to fight with in large organization every day, is do not create a raw data vault based on a logical enterprise model or only a business data vault. We've seen that also. There's no raw data vault. They only built a business data vault, but totally based on like a logical model they created for their enterprise, which is a model that typically is valid for like 10 minutes in the organization, and then you need to change it because the organization is changing, the source structures are changing, everything is changing. So that's actually the reason why these other methods never worked. The fact that you actually directly build in your integration layer the single version of the truth. You try to build it. For me, I never came across an organization that has that single version of the truth. And even if it exists, it actually will change over time. So you have multiple versions of the truth over time. So that's why Datavault gives you the means to be able to do that. It allows you through the single version of the fact in that first layer, be able to model as many versions of the truth that you want in your business vault and the layers coming after that. So that flexibility is actually really the strength of that model. So please use that. Try to convince these, I would say, dinosaurs typically in banks and in insurance companies not to go for such an enterprise model and just translate actually these data models into a data vault model, because maybe the flexibility of the model will still help you in the way you can make changes, and because the model is resilient to change. but it still will, you will still have the old pains again of having to change a lot, re-engineer a lot, because you just implemented a fixed model in there that actually, yeah, that's not needed. I mean, that's the strength of Datavault, is that it should grow based on those conceptual model. It should actually grow organically with the Datavault modeling methodology and not actually by creating a fixed model. Okay.
So a little bit about me. If you don't know, I'm the founder and CEO of Datavault in UK. That's not the Datavault method. Datavault UK, which is a boutique consultancy that specializes in Datavault projects. I've got many years experience in consultancy, more than 30. I've stopped counting. I've run out of toes and fingers to count that up. Recently specializing a lot in Datavault 2 data platforms. I chair this group, obviously, and working with many clients in a coaching role in Datavault projects. You can check us out on the web address below. There's pages in there with links to learning resources, videos, blogs, and so on, which is worth checking out. And my email's there if anyone wants to get hold of me. Right, I have 3 very quick points. I may well only take 5 or 6 minutes on it, so hopefully we'll get through this quickly. So the first thing I needed to be aware of was, well, more traditional data warehouse methods are very fragile in the sense that you've got to get it right at the beginning. If you try to change things downstream, they can be very expensive. A lot of reworks involved for this. And it's something you don't really appreciate in the Datavault method when you first use it. But there are a number of features in there that make refactoring very easy. In particular, the link, the many-to-many link between hubs. That link, built-in flexibility, yes, in other words, it supports any cardinality of relationship between hubs. But it also stops this sort of cascading impact. So if you find you don't like a hub and you want to change it, the impact is just the hub and the attached links to it. It doesn't cascade the impact across the whole model. And that means you can experiment. So you can try things out, and the impact of them is often very, very localized. And you can refactor out of problems if you build them in. So for example, I have many clients that maybe have been sitting there for a year or more, maybe, with data architects arguing about the best way to model a customer. What's the identifier, the primary key for a customer? That's a very difficult one to sort out. You'll have different camps saying use this, one camp saying use something else. And with Datavault, you can pick one and run with it and see how it works and change it later if you need to. So that's the first thing I needed to understand was just do something, experiment, and learn. And by the bottom point there is Goldilocks solutions. Dirk very kindly pointed out, don't do a source system, don't do an enterprise data model. We want something in the middle. And very often that's the case with Datavault. It's a bit of an art to get it right. You can overdo things, underdo things, but try and get the balance right in the middle, which you'll get with experience. And you can only get experience by experimenting. Business Vault. When I first started with Datavault, I think Mike's mentioned this as well, but the Business Vault wasn't really very well documented. And I was rather puzzled as to what it was. Does it sit in its own schema? Is it a separate database in its own right? Does it have a different organization structure to it? And eventually, after some time, I began to realize, well, I'm sure you all know this now, but the Business Vault sits on top of and is part of the raw vault. It's all one big data model, one big data system. I also began to understand that business rules really behave like an external system, like another source system. Just happens to use its source data from the data vault, so it's like a recursive map. Data sits in the vault, goes through the business rules, and repopulates the data vaults, satellites, and links accordingly. That was really quite helpful because I then began to understand how you can separate out and build in that auditability. The raw data can bring in the raw column names, the raw data structures, model them in the data vault, and make those changes and map them to the business terms using your business rules. And then finally, I've seen some blogs about this recently, asking questions about the best way to get data out of a data vault and questioning about the number of joins and so on required to do that. What you'll find, of course, is data stored in a pattern in the data vault. So getting data out of the data vault also works with patterns. And there's some common queries that happen on data vault. For example, tell me the latest version of the data for this hub for a particular satellite. And you'll find that you have a set of SQL that you'll use repeatedly over and over again across different queries. Also, pits and bridges, when you first come across them, sound interesting, but as you build more and more reporting layer objects in place, you find that these pits and bridges really give you the kick and the performance that you need to respond very quickly to user needs. And the ability to build out virtual star schemas from these pits and bridges is an extremely liberating process. Also being aware that there are many other ways of getting data out of a data vault. So my best example I have is where we built a Redis set of tables. And in Redis tables, we had key value pairs. And the value pair was basically a JSON object. And that is used to feed a data warehouse, sorry, a website. So the website, when it fired up, would fire a query against this Redis database and say, here's some context. And the database could fire back the JSON content, which was then rendered in the data in the website itself. Very useful mechanism. And as changes went through the data vault, they would trickle out to this Redis table in the middle and provide a sort of semi-real-time update to the way that the data, the website was presented. So that's my 3 points. I said I wouldn't be very long, about 5-6 minutes. So that's the end of the session today, but we have questions. So I can come back to I'll go back to our front page. Scroll back through the front. Right, start there. Right, so we've got a number of questions on the chat. I'll act as a chairman here. If they count, have we got everyone ready for on the panel for answering questions? We have, yeah, as ready as we'll ever be. Right, I'm going to go back up the list nearer the top. Oh, lots and lots of questions. Yes, so question about sharing the video. The video will be out on the user group website. We'll also put it up onto YouTube, our YouTube channel. I said as soon as my video elf has managed to cut the copy, which is worth publishing. So the link will be up there as soon as we can. Usually takes a couple of days. Not always, but usually takes a couple of days. Right, so scrolling down. Pasta Sonato, question about that. Where can we buy the mana? Anywhere. They're good stuff. Okay, right, moving down. About data cataloging, to understand what data is available and how to make sense of it. Has any of the panel used data catalogs? Anyone want to jump in there?
Yeah, maybe I can share how we approached it. So we always had this battle with the documentation. Where does it live? And the moment you write it, 5 minutes later, it's outdated. But something that we found working really well for us in the last, I think, 2 years or so, whenever we implement a presentation model, but also in the data vault model, we heavily use comment fields when creating the DDL. So there we add all the logic or explanation for what we have done and where this field comes from. And then we have a lot of metadata dashboards that can be searched, and essentially the documentation lives together with the code. And in addition to that, we have opened up our Git repository within the company. We've made a great effort to put, for example, all secrets and credentials in Vault, so there is nothing let's say, sensitive per se, only code and business logic. And those two tools work quite well for us because anytime we get a question, we can just say, okay, this is where you can find it, either by a link to a file or a query. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to jump in, add to that?
Yeah, Neil, we did at the Belgium bank, but it goes a bit further than only a data catalog, but actually is a mapping of that conceptual model, what I was talking about, and then really linking it to the physical implementation. So where you find these conceptual objects inside your data vault. And so in that way, also have a full documentation of your system. We used, in that case, we used Colibra, which is actually a business modeling tool actually. And then together with, at that time, it was Oracle Enterprise Metadata Manager, the technical part that was linked in through an interface that we had to build ourselves. But in this way, when like your regulatory bodies came in the bank, they could just drill down from the business view and see at the real data at the end what was in the data warehouse for those specific entities. So, and that adds again to that flexibility of Datavault, because you don't have that physical model needed anymore. Is the metadata that has all that information from the business up down to your real implementation. So, and that's, I think it's the most flexible way to actually implement Datavault with all the necessary metadata from the business up to the technical, up to then the information itself in your data warehouse.
I can't agree more. Yeah, I'm finding increasingly my Datavault projects are bringing in glossaries and lineage traceability in there as well. A number of my clients are using the Irwin Data Intelligence Suite for that as well, which allows you to you know, explore your data lineage and map things up to glossaries and policies as well in your organization. Okay, next question really is directed to Iliana because of the microservices you have. A couple of questions on that. Tracking and dealing with changes in source data models from microservices. And do you educate your developers in the microservices area to work with you, or do you get surprised?
I think it's something that we learn to work better over the years. So at the beginning, indeed, it was always around releases a bit of a surprise that some things didn't work anymore. But we ended up having quite like a big discussion with all our development teams. Now I think there are 15, 20 products that we source data from. And essentially we agreed to have technical contracts. So they have schema testing in their own code during build times to find out if there are any breaking changes. Usually if there are no breaking changes, new fields can come through and we pick them up when we're ready. If there are breaking changes, we deal with this either by agreeing to do back migration in the source, or we handle it in the business vault or even on the presentation layer. So this is the two mechanisms, but we found that in a microservice setup, you need these technical contracts to just sleep well at night.
Okay, good, thank you. Anyone else got experience on microservices integration? No one else? Okay, thank you. Scrolling down. Mike, there was a question to you about virtualization of your presentation layer. Do you virtualize or do you physicalize? You're muted.
So we like to virtualize everything out of the gate and then only persist where it's required for either performance or for complex transformations. And I would add that with the security approach, you have to virtualize, because the whole inner workings of that approach is that the database has to know who the user is that's connecting, and those virtual marked views are where the work is done to produce the filtered or masked results based on who's asking. So those are always virtualized. The question is, you know, how far back do they reach? Do they go all the way to the raw vault, or do you have some persisted data in the business vault, or do you have even some persisted InfoMart level data? And the answer is all of the above, as long as the final marked view is that a view virtualized.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Does that help?
Thank you. Question from Piotr Peszkowski about the right to be forgotten requirement in GDPR and other legislation across the world. How do we implement the right to be forgotten? In other words, deleting or anonymizing records for an individual when the solution is backed up by a big data or read-only solution. Anyone else experience with that?
I don't know if it was I don't know if it was who that was targeted for, but I can say with our security approach, then we can certainly obfuscate or de-identify the person, which is a partial compliance with GDPR. Really, to ultimately comply with GDPR, you do need to delete that data for that person. And Datavault is really perfect for that because you've identified the person and you've encapsulated their data in objects that relate directly to that person. So identifying what data to quote unquote delete, which we prefer to use soft deletes in that case, if everybody's familiar with what a soft delete would be. To delete that person would ultimately be softly de-identifying them within the Datavault. I'm certainly open to other thoughts on that as it's a significant challenge.
Well, maybe some of our Europeans got a different perspective on that. So GDPR.
Yeah, I think we're a bit more strict on these things in Europe. So what we do in the tool is that you can put, of course, that very critical data in a separate satellite and have your special security on that, which would be that's one of the strong points again of Datavault, that you can functionally then split these things off. But what we then say that when a delete comes in, and what you normally would do virtually, that really would become a physical delete for the key and all the history of that key, because that's what you need to do in Europe. You need to really take it out. You still have, of course, the key for that customer, and you still have like statistic information, probably like his birth date, and so other gender and things like that. You will keep it in a separate satellite, but the real important GDPR information or critical, you will need to take out. That's how Europe functions in this respect. And of course, if you're then in a big data environment where deletes are not possible, you have to solve it by making like a new table and then get all the data into that and then copy it back to the real file. In this case, of course, it's big data. So it's a bit more hassle, of course, in a big data environment than in a normal database. Yeah. And to be honest, we don't see that many data vaults being implemented on a big data. I mean, there are like Snowflake and many good databases on the market at this moment that are at least as good and have at least as much performance as a big data cluster, which is also not really made for a lot of small objects. So that's So
we have a similar thing. This has to build into the governance processes around the handling of personal data, and we have sometimes in our practice we build a sweeping program that runs through every month and copies data forward on tables to make sure that data is being deleted properly. So the technology drives the solution there, I'm afraid. Okay, anyone want to add more to that? Roll on to the next question. Changing data platforms. Has anyone actually had the experience of doing that in their projects, where you've swapped from one technology to another midstream? What happened?
You mean like from one data warehouse solution to another, for instance?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of experience in that. So we came from Redshift. I see some people here actually are in Redshift. Actually, we came first from Postgres and to Redshift, and from Redshift, we had a lot of concurrency problems, and we really wanted to democratize the access to the data warehouse, and this was not possible, and wanted to split the storage from the computing, also not possible. So we did migrate from Redshift into Snowflake, which was pretty smooth. A team of about 2 data engineers working full-time during 2 months, and then for the reporting layer, so all the data sources in Tableau, it took 1 month more, and this was pretty smooth simply because the language is like the dialect is really similar, and we used most of the time ANSI functions To be honest, right now in Snowflake, because there are so many custom functions that are not really SQL ANSI, we try to we abuse them a bit. But all in all, it was a pretty smooth migration and totally worth it. And we had to get buy-in from the business, of course, to stop developing features and so on. But we were able to get the buy-in for it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to add to that? No.
I just want to add one note to the which is somehow relates to what Mike and Dirk said, that if you have the proper metadata, then you can regenerate this stuff even for different technologies. So what we used to use is that we have a quite heavy metadata describing the structures, the ETL stuff, and all the related, and then you can move from one technology to another relatively easy. And we are talking here about migrating the data, but changing the tool or the ETL we are running.
Okay, thank you. Question from Marcel about using one JSON column per satellite for all the data. That is a variation I've seen working with Snowflake. I think Will Riley can probably chip in there as well. I think we've done some experimentation with that. It's a very good idea to do that. The only question I have is if you get data coming in already in column format, you're going to have to pay the overhead of compacting it into a JSON column to start with. But there's no reason to break up a JSON column on the way in if you want to store that as a single variant column in Snowflake. It's a very, very good idea to do that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, it's Will here. What we decided to do was not to do that in the actual raw vault, because there's obviously quite a repetitive overhead in terms of then breaking that out into either the presentation layer, business vault. So what we did was, because we were getting an awful lot of information that we might not want to use straight away but want to use later, we created a sort of lake environment with a sort of file ID to simplify things, a file ID, a load date time, and a JSON variant column, so that we could exploit that data later, but we could store everything that was fired at us into well, currently Amazon S3 buckets. So what we have is a persisted lake that we can use to either load or reload. And we build some schema on read views using Snowflake with that, and use that as our staging area.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know, Mirko, do you want to add something to that? I know you've done something in there, or are you going to be quiet?
Yeah, I was gonna, hi everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's something we've been working on quite heavily at the moment. And I mean, it's mainly, sort of tying it together with GDPR as well. And the sort of compromise that we found is that, we sort of store our JSON. So we do pretty much the same. We have a persistent staging area that is very heavily JSON, because that's the format that our sources send us data. But then what we had to end up doing is to take the PII fields and extract them from that JSON and put them into columns, and then just remove the PII from the JSON, so that we can keep the JSON for longer, don't have to worry about RTBF, and obviously put the things out in columns. We tried to do not having to sort of do this split and end up with this sort of kind of mixed model with JSON plus sort of columns, but unfortunately we didn't have a good solution for that, to write a JSON in a warehouse that did not work really well for us, at least with Snowflake. So that's why we ended up just deleting PII and flattening essentially those PII fields.
Thanks. Sorry, I know you're not on the panel, but I know you were doing something in that space, which is worth probably adding to the discussion. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah,
you're welcome. Maybe we'll get you to do a presentation in the future about your use case, if you're allowed to. Okay. Data lakes. So the persistent staging areas, data lakes. Good ideas or not? What do you think, panel? Given with Snowflake, do you need a data lake even? Gabor, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think it's it's a good idea, and to be honest, I think it's a quite old idea. I mean, in the good old days, we also used to have some sort of a landing space or landing area or whatever, where we just store the data we've got from the sources, or where we put the extracted data to be kept for a longer time period, even after loading into our data warehouse or into our data vault. And I think that this is a good idea. I mean, somehow this relates to the fact that you can change your mind and you can modify your structures and you can modify your loading procedures, because you have the source data, and you can reload it if you want. Yeah, supposing that the volume of the data allows a reload. So I think that this is a good idea. And on the other hand, it helps with the flexibility as well. So if you have a changing source structure, then it's relatively easy to store the extracts and be flexible about it. And then you can just use the part that you're interested in on the data vault. So yeah, I think it's good.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe to share our approach. We have quite strong focus on structuring the data, because of also previous experience where schemas change and then the data turns into garbage and a lot of kind of urgent kind of data fixes. So now we have focused on having everything structured in the sense with the data vault, what Anna mentioned. Whenever we see new fields, we will add them right away to the data vault model. And because it's so easy to add new fields, we will just follow the new development from the backend. That said, we do use JSON or variant types from Snowflake, but everything has a contract and a schema attached to it and the version of that schema. So we can always parse it according to that version. So I think that is kind of where we say we like variant types, but we don't like unstructured data. So that is kind of our approach.
Okay, that's great, thank you. I saw a couple of questions about DBT Vault in there, just to let people know. It was originally built to run with Snowflake. There is a very advanced state port there for BigQuery in place. We've had a number of people approach us about Redshift port as well. So we're discussing about starting that off, and SQL Server, Postgres as well. We've got people asking us about those, but at the moment it just runs with Snowflake. Watch this space. There'll be another release fairly soon coming out, probably just after Christmas, with some upgrades to it. Anyone else got any other questions? I've run out of questions on the list. We're about almost on time. So no.
I had a question actually.
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't put it in the chat, but I was kind of intrigued about the sort of trade-off between not building a vault that follows your source system, but at the same time don't follow and try to create this, holy grail of like an enterprise model, which for me was always, if I don't create a source system, then I need to have an enterprise model that I'm sort of trying to reach out. So it was kind of a bit of a relation. So I'd be curious to learn a bit more, how to strike the balance between those two.
Okay, I found John Giles's book very helpful there, because he takes the abstract level and breaks it down using an ontology approach into the more physical objects that you have. And that I found that quite useful as a thinking tool to help me pick the right level here. It's very difficult to do. This is the art bit of the building of the warehouse. He does show you how to refactor as well. So if you get it wrong, he shows you how to refactor to drop the level of detail or increase the level of abstraction here. I don't know if actually it's probably a good point. If Cindy's still there, I don't know. Maybe she could chip in and say what's the right level here. Are you still here, Cindy? Yes, you are.
I am. Sorry, I was distracted.
Okay, do you know what the question is? How do we resolve the difference between being too source system oriented versus too abstract and enterprise warehousey level?
Well, I think your point, looking at an ontology, I mean, that's where we always want to start. And I think the first and foremost is to keep in mind that the data vault always is and has been and will be about the business. So the concepts of, you know, how the business perceives their operations and how they define a particular concept, customer, product, whatever it is, it kind of marries the two. The difference is that you don't, if you build a source system data vault, you've done nothing more than create a replication of siloed warehouses, right? So to bring value to the business, you want to do that integration. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's almost like taking a universal data model. It's so abstract usually anyway, because they're industry vertical sort of dependent, if you will, or focused. And then taking an ontology, you're sort of taking the concept of a universal or an industry model, and then I would say like customizing it for your business, for your enterprise, right? Because you're taking a higher level concept, you're bringing it home to the enterprise, to the business. And then when you reflect that in your raw vault, because that's your goal, otherwise what value are you bringing if you're just replicating your source systems? You're really not bringing any value. You're adding another step. I've seen customers build source system raw vaults, and then their answer to how to integrate is to push all those business rules into a business vault. That's not what a business vault is. So I think starting with an ontology and a taxonomy, building out the conceptual view from the business perspective. There are some other good tools out there that help with that. Just from a business perspective, LA Technologies has come out with I think it's a fantastic tool that focuses on, it's a tool for the business. It's not an IT tool. And so it helps you collaborate with the business to get that view and to sort of steer away from the temptation to just load all the data into your raw vault in its sort of source structure, if you will, and then try to implement the business rules downstream to integrate it. So did I answer your question, Neil? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did. Actually, could you introduce yourself? So maybe people don't know who you are on the
Oh, sure. Yeah. My name, thanks. My name's Cindy Meyerson. I own a company called Data Rebels. I'm also a business owner with Dan Lindstedt and Sanjay Pandey in Data Vault Alliance. And so I'm one of Dan's certified instructors. And I've worked in, I guess, IT, if you will, data management for about 35 years. Spent about 17 years in Department of Defense intelligence community. So we built some, like Mike was mentioning, we built some large data vaults inside the intelligence community here in the US. So that's sort of my background, and I've had the pleasure of working with Neil and talking with Neil quite a bit over the last few years. So anyway, that's who I am.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just so you know what you're talking about. Basically, you got the right to talk about this. Fine, thank you. Anyone else got any questions? Hopefully that answered you. This is a bit of an art, this level, getting the level right, but you don't have to get it absolutely right because you can refactor. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, maybe as I started this discussion, maybe I can give my view on this, how we approached it, because I agree with Cindy. It's actually, for me, it starts with that conceptual business model, and you know, of course, should make the mistake that you go way too far from your source because you lose automation. So it's actually that business model, mapping it to the entities that you have in your sources, and this builds actually your hubs and your links, and this is your canvas of that model, and the rest is flexibility through your satellites So that is for me how it works the best in the implementation and the fastest to be able to use as much automation as possible, but still bring that business part actually into your model and not having to build that enterprise model on the upfront, because otherwise you lose all speed you have with actually a Datavault implementation. Yeah. So that's my view on it. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Anyone else want to add to that? Any other questions? If not,
yeah, maybe just something to add to this, because I find this super interesting, and we struggle with this kind of modeling quite a bit. And one area where now we are developing quite a lot in the Datavault is with Salesforce model, which is quite standard in some sense around CRM management. And I think in this kind of solutions that are so broad and really using standard models, it is interesting to have a reference architecture in the Datavault, because we are solving exactly the same problem again and again in a different way. So I think there are those little pockets where it makes sense, but in the broader spectrum, every business is a little bit different, I think, and that's where we need to differentiate.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay. Right, I think we have run out of questions. So we normally just hang on a bit for a few minutes afterwards if anyone wants to hang around and talk. But we'll call an end to the formal part of the meeting here. Thank you very much. I've had a lot of comments back from people saying they really appreciated the discussion we've had. Thank you very much to the co-presenters. I found that quite illuminating, and thank you very much for your contribution. I look forward to seeing everyone in January, please, to come back and see Dan present. It should be a very interesting conversation and presentation about the future of Datavault. And everybody else, please have a very happy Christmas from all of us here. Don't get too tight or too close to your friends at Christmas, apparently, just in case. But we can save up all the fun for the conferences planned in the new year, in the summer, that are coming up. So look forward to seeing you all in January, if not after that, and have a really happy time. Thank you very much.